I always believed that home was more than just a place. It was a symbol of everything I'd fought for: freedom, security, and peace. After years of serving my country as a U.S. Army colonel, I finally found what I thought would be my sanctuary, a modest house in a tranquil neighborhood. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. This was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter, a fresh start after decades of sacrifice and service. Little did I know, this neighborhood had its own set of rules, rules that weren't just written in the HOA handbook. They were unspoken, unwritten, and undeniably unfair. At first, it was small things: letters about my lawn not being green enough, complaints about my flagpole being too tall. I brushed it off as nothing more than overzealous rule enforcement. After all, I dealt with far worse in my career. But looking back now, those were just the warning signs. As a soldier, you're trained to recognize threats, to trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right. And let me tell you, something didn't feel right about this place. I was deployed overseas when it happened, thousands of miles away from home, serving my country like I'd done for years. But while I was out there defending freedom, someone back here decided that my house, my home, wasn't worth defending. When I got back, everything was gone: my furniture, my belongings, my memories. All because someone decided that my home was abandoned property. And who made that decision? The HOA president, a woman who thought she could play judge, jury, and executioner with something that didn't belong to her. They sold my house without my permission, without even notifying me properly. And when I confronted them about it, well, let's just say their excuses didn't hold up under scrutiny. This wasn't just about a house. This was about power, about control, and about how far some people are willing to go to take what doesn't belong to them. I've spent my entire adult life serving this country as a U.S. Army colonel. I've led missions in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. I've faced challenges most people can't even imagine. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I was about to face in this quiet suburban neighborhood. This house was supposed to be my reward, my sanctuary. After years of sacrifice, I finally had a place to call my own, a place where I could relax, unwind, and just be. But from the very beginning, something felt off. At first, I thought it was just me being overly cautious. After all, I'd spent years in environments where you had to constantly be on alert. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Or so I thought. My life has always been about service, service to my country, service to my community, and I carried that same sense of duty into this neighborhood. But what I didn't realize was that this neighborhood had its own set of rules, rules that didn't always apply equally to everyone. Homeowners associations, or HOAs, were originally created to maintain property values and ensure neighborhoods were well kept. But over time, they've become notorious for overstepping their boundaries, especially when it comes to targeting specific homeowners. In many cases, HOAs have unchecked power. They can issue fines, place liens on homes, and even foreclose on properties, all without much oversight. The HOA president, let's call her Karen, seemed friendly enough at first. She even came by to introduce herself when I first moved in. But it didn't take long for her true colors to show. Just a little reminder about our community standards. We like to keep things uniform around here. At first, it was small things: complaints about my lawn being too brown, notices about my flagpole being too tall. I brushed it off as nothing more than harmless nitpicking. But then the letters started coming more frequently. I received the first fine notice, a $200 penalty for not trimming my hedges within HOA standards. I paid the fine without thinking much of it. After all, I wanted to be a good neighbor. But then came another fine, and another, and another. I started noticing other things too, like how repair requests I submitted were mysteriously ignored while other neighbors seemed to have no problem getting theirs approved. And then there were the letters, the ones I never even knew existed until much later. It's not uncommon for HOAs to claim they've sent notices when they haven't, or worse, intercept mail so homeowners don't even know there's an issue until it's too late. I later learned that Karen had intercepted several certified letters about supposed violations, letters that would have given me a chance to address the issues before they escalated. By the time I realized what was happening, it was already too late. I had been counting down the days to come back home. After months of deployment, I was ready to return to the life I had built. But as I pulled into my driveway, something caught my eye: a for sale sign planted right in front of my house. My heart sank. I didn't understand what was happening. This was my home, the place I had worked so hard for, the place I thought would be waiting for me when I got back. I called a neighbor to ask what was going on, but they avoided eye contact and mumbled something vague about the HOA. That's when I found out. While I was overseas serving my country, the HOA had decided that my house was abandoned property. They sold it at auction for just $3,200 because of what they claimed were unpaid dues. In Texas, HOAs have significant power when it comes to foreclosures. They don't need a court order. They can initiate what's called a non-judicial foreclosure if there's a power of sale clause in the deed restrictions. This means they can sell a home without ever stepping foot in a courtroom. In cases like this, and others involving military personnel, there are supposed to be safeguards in place under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. But those safeguards are often ignored or exploited by HOAs looking to make a quick profit. It felt like a punch to the gut. I had been fighting for freedom overseas while someone here was taking away mine. I wasn't going to let this slide. This wasn't just about me. It was about standing up for every soldier who's been taken advantage of by people like Karen. I walked into an HOA board meeting with a folder full of documents. My military orders, proof of payment for previous dues, and copies of federal laws protecting service members. I invoked the Service Members Civil Relief Act, a federal law designed to protect active-duty military personnel from things like foreclosure while they're deployed. Karen, we didn't know you were on active duty. That's when I showed her the certified letters she claimed were sent, letters that mysteriously never made it to me. And then there was this. It's clear from this analysis that these signatures were not made by the homeowner. This raises serious questions about how these foreclosure proceedings were initiated. The case went all the way to court. My attorney argued that the foreclosure violated both state law and federal protections under the SCRA. The judge read through the documents before looking directly at Karen. Not only did this HOA fail to follow proper procedures, but they also ignored federal laws designed to protect service members like Colonel, your last name. This foreclosure is null and void. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat as murmurs filled the courtroom. Her smirk faded quickly when the judge compared her actions to those of other HOAs that had faced public backlash for targeting military families. This wasn't just a legal failure, it was a moral one. What Karen and her HOA did wasn't just wrong, it was a betrayal of the very values we claim to stand for. The ruling didn't just void the illegal sale of my home. The judge went further. He ordered the HOA to pay a $50,000 fine for violating federal protections under the Service Members Civil Relief Act and state-level homeowner protection laws. But what hit the hardest was the court's decision to permanently bar Karen from ever holding a position on any HOA board again. Her authority, her smugness, her little fiefdom, it was all gone in a single moment of accountability. For the first time since returning from deployment, I felt like I could breathe again. I walked out of that courthouse not just as a soldier, but as a man who had stood up and won against a system that tried to silence him. The weight on my shoulders, the feeling that everything I'd sacrificed could be erased by a vindictive neighbor with a clipboard, lifted. But my victory wasn't mine alone. That courtroom was filled with veterans, neighbors, and strangers who'd come after reading about my case in the paper or hearing it on the local news. People from every walk of life, many of them with their own stories of HOA overreach. Some had been fined into financial ruin, some had lost property, others had simply been harassed out of their neighborhoods. Their presence reminded me that this wasn't just my battle. It was a movement, and it didn't stop in the courtroom. Local officials took notice. A state senator, Elijah Brooks, reached out and publicly vowed to push for reforms. This is a textbook case of how power can be abused without oversight, he said. We can no longer allow HOAs to operate as unregulated governments. A bill was introduced shortly after, dubbed the Homeowners Protection and Service Member Rights Act, which would place stricter limits on non-judicial foreclosures, require court involvement in all foreclosure proceedings against active-duty military personnel, and introduce penalties for any HOA found intercepting or falsifying notices. But while the wheels of legislation turned, I focused on rebuilding. Not just my house, but my peace. The new buyers, who had purchased my home in good faith and were equally furious upon learning the truth, voluntarily voided the sale. They were repaid from the HOA's reserve fund, another clause added by the judge. With help from volunteers and donations from veterans groups, we restored what was lost. My furniture, my photos, the worn flag that had followed me through 5 deployments all returned. And while some pieces were beyond saving, the most important thing I got back was dignity. I chose not to sell the house or move away. Some advised me to start fresh elsewhere, but I wasn't going to let Karen or anyone else dictate where I could or couldn't live. My front porch became a symbol. I flew my flag higher than before. I mowed my lawn every week, not because of their rules, but because it was my home, and I took pride in it. Other veterans in the area began speaking out. Town halls became standing room only as more homeowners shared stories of harassment, selective enforcement, and abuse. One couple, a Navy widow and her teenage son, had been fined thousands for having a non-compliant mailbox. Another elderly man said he was reported for suspicious behavior because he liked walking his dog at night. We were finally breaking the silence. HOAs were originally meant to build community, but too many had become breeding grounds for power trips, pettiness, and prejudice, especially in neighborhoods where people of color, military families, or working-class residents were seen as not fitting the aesthetic. My fight opened the floodgates, and suddenly, people weren't afraid anymore. I also received hundreds of messages from across the country. Veterans from Georgia to California shared similar experiences, returning from service only to find their homes auctioned off, their possessions gone, their sacrifices ignored. Some had tried to fight back, but were buried under bureaucracy. Others had given up. A few had never told their story until now. Reading those letters, I knew I couldn't stop. With the help of a legal advocacy group, I started a foundation, the Homefront Justice Initiative. Our goal was simple: provide legal resources, education, and representation to veterans and low-income families facing HOA abuse. Within the first 6 months, we helped block 10 illegal foreclosures and assisted with the passage of local ordinances in 3 counties that demanded transparency and accountability from all HOA boards. And while the legal victories were important, what mattered more was the restoration of trust. Trust that you could come home and not be treated like a threat or a burden. Trust that your years of sacrifice wouldn't be erased by a bureaucratic technicality or a power-hungry neighbor. This story isn't just about a house. It's about a principle that no one should be above the law, not even those hiding behind a title like President of the HOA. It's about every soldier who missed birthdays, holidays, births, and funerals to serve, only to return and be treated like an outsider. It's about every Black family that's had to fight twice as hard just to live in peace in neighborhoods that were never designed to welcome them. And most of all, it's about the idea that justice isn't passive. It requires voices. It requires outrage. It requires action. To anyone out there facing similar abuse, don't stay silent. Speak up. File your complaints. Document everything. Share your story. Use your voice. You're not alone. What happened to me was painful, but it gave birth to something larger, a movement. To those in power, you're being watched. The days of silent suffering are over. We're organizing. We're educating. We're legislating. As for me, I sit on my porch every evening now. The same porch they tried to take away from me. I sip my coffee and watch the sun go down over the trees that line my street. Sometimes a neighbor stops by chat. Sometimes a kid rides by and waves. Sometimes I get a letter from someone I helped. And every time, I feel the same quiet pride. Not because I won a court case, but because I reclaimed what was mine and helped others do the same. This fight isn't over. Not until every service member can come home knowing their rights are safe. Not until every homeowner is protected from those who abuse their positions. Not until laws are changed and enforced. Not until dignity isn't something we have to beg for, but something guaranteed. I defended this nation on foreign soil. Now, I fight here, at home, not just for a house, but for the soul of what it means to belong. This isn't just my story, it's our story.